Hi, and welcome to Speechcast, the essential public speaking podcast. I'm Dave Azer, and my goal with this show is to get you to fall in love with public speaking in all of its forms so that the next time you take the stage or the TV studio or even your living room on a Zoom video conference, you feel empowered to own the room. My guest today is a very accomplished television host and voiceover artist, Julie Alexandria. She's been a VJ for MTV. She was the anchor of the daily syndicated show OK TV. She's worked extensively for the MLB Network and was the field reporter for the Washington Nationals and the San Diego Padres. She's hosted college football for Fox, Sports Illustrated, and the Big Ten Network. She hosted the U.S. Open tennis for ESPN, and she's currently hosting La Vida Baseball. Plus, you've heard her voice on TV and radio commercials and even some video games. And she's my good friend. We even shot a pilot together when we both lived in New York City. And I can't wait to chat with Julie because I'm sure she has a lifetime of experience and great advice that she can share with you. Before we get to my conversation with Julie, just a quick reminder, if you are listening to this podcast right now, please subscribe. And if you're listening on Apple and iTunes podcasts, please leave a rating and a review. That would mean so much to me. And we even read the reviews right here on the show. So, without any further ado, let's meet Julie. It's our next episode of Speechcast.
This is Speechcast, the essential public speaking podcast. Get ready to own the room with your host, Dave Azer.
Julie, my friend. Oh, it's been so long. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? It is so good to see you.
You and I were just talking before we started rolling about when the last time we saw each other was, and we figured out it was 2013, which is insane to me. How is that possible?
I mean, I used to have a job that would take me to all corners of the US, and hence I was able to come visit all of my friends. And now I'm here in San Diego.
Yeah, which is 3,000 miles away from me. Plus, you throw in a pandemic, so we're not exactly hanging out. But now I'm seeing you on Zoom, which is so cool, and it brings back a flood of really wonderful memories. In your intro, I think your intro took 46 minutes because you've hosted for every channel that's ever existed, which is great. But I mentioned all your stuff, but I wanted to start with your VO work because I have not really spent a lot of time interviewing professional voiceover artists, and I think that that's an area of broadcasting that hopefully appeals to a lot of people listening and watching. So let's start with that. How did that happen for you? How did you become a VO artist?
It's a funny story. So I have a theatrical background. I'm a theatrically trained actress, and I performed all over New York City. When I was 20 years old, I moved to New York City and I was booking all sorts of random stage shows. And in theater, you really have to use your voice. It's more of a technical know-how, and you have to project and you have to, convey emotion through your voice, whether you're singing or just speaking, and especially if you're doing heightened language like Shakespeare or pentameter. And so because of that, I was doing a show. I was playing a British person on stage on Broadway, and there was an agent in the audience, and she heard my British accent, and she waited for me backstage by the stage door. And when I came out, she said, we're really trying to build up our British contingent at our agency. Would you be interested in coming in and reading for us? And I was like, oh my gosh, that's great. I'm not really a Brit, but awesome. And I ended up booking a bunch of British voiceovers out of the gate, which was really random. And then I started doing character voices, and then I started doing narration, and it just kind of built up from there, and national network commercials. And using your voice has become very helpful, I think, in all aspects. So I certainly learned a lot, but I'm not any sort of classically trained voiceover artist per se. But as someone once said to me or described it, voiceover is truly telling a story or reading a story to someone who is blind, right? You can hear when you're smiling, you can convey emotion, you can tell a story through your voice just in how, you technically speak. And so it has helped exponentially, I think, in all aspects of my career.
Yeah, and I love that you come at it as not, as you said, a classically trained voiceover artist, but it is a skill that you have. I'm so curious about the British accent, and don't worry, I won't ask you to do it. Don't worry. I saw you roll your eyes, but because
no,
right,
it's okay. I'll absolutely do it if you ask.
there, I didn't even have to ask. That's
There you
great. But How did you have such a great British accent? Was that just something you were good at?
I have an ear. I think I just have an ear for language. Like as a kid, I would imitate people. And it was, they always say what you do as a child is what, indicates what you do as an adult. And when I was a kid, you'll understand this. At a Passover Seder, when I was like 9 years old, I went around with a Sony tape recorder and a microphone, and I interviewed all of my family members. And then I would impersonate them and then interview them and ask them what they were doing there at the Seder and what brought them there and what was their favorite part of the meal. And fast forward to how many years later, and that's basically what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think I was doing the same thing at a Rosh Hashanah dinner, so we can compare notes and we can have our own broadcast.
Love it.
The Jewish holiday interview series. So talk me through the dynamic of being in a voiceover booth. You and I have both hosted a ton of live TV with a ton of energy around you, a crowd cheering, hopefully not booing, and you feed off of that. And even if it's not live TV, you're hosting in a studio and you've got people around you, maybe a co-host. In a VO booth, it's hard because you're not around people. How do you find that energy and that storytelling ability in your voice?
I think two things. I think it's really important to have a very robust imagination, because mentally you have to be there. You have to be in that environment. Imagine, like you said, great example, a crowd around you or being in whatever environment. I use this a lot when I do voiceovers for video games, because a lot of times you have to imagine your character on whatever planet or in whatever circumstance they may be and transport yourself pretty quickly, because time is of the essence. Those engineers are not waiting for you to get into character. They want it done now. So time is money, and to have a really good imagination, and then also to just be able to have the ability to pull up your energy, right? And to place your energy wherever that level happens to be given that circumstance. So if all of a sudden we're just having a chat and I have to go in the booth and bring my energy level to a 10, I need to be able to reach into my bag of tricks and be able to get there pretty quickly. So I think having that range and then having a really good sense of self-timing, because a lot of times with voiceovers, they're set to a commercial or they're set to a specific time. So they'll say, this is a 30-second spot. So having a really good internal clock is very important, knowing your pace of speech. So knowing how to read the copy within that time frame is truly important, especially when you're auditioning. Because if you're reading a 60-second copy and it takes you 120 seconds, you're not going to get the job. So they're going to want to see how quickly you can read a 15-second spot, a 60-second spot, or to match your voiceover to the time of the piece.
And these are the wonderful nuances of our business in all of its forms. It's the little things that I think people don't realize are real skills for hosts, for voiceover artists. Like if you're watching an anchor on live TV, you and I know because we've done it, but if the anchor's doing their job well, the viewer doesn't know that someone's counting down in their ear, telling them they've got to throw to commercial right now, or they've got to fill time, or the guest just dropped out, or a light just crashed behind you. To the viewer, to the listener, they don't know and they don't care. All they care is that you give a command performance.
It's so true. And being able to multitask and, like I said, have that internal sense of timing, internal sense of self, and internal monologue of knowing your topic and knowing what you are talking about while you have, if you're lucky enough to have an IFB in your ear with a producer guiding you, because sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have a camera guy who's part of the ENG crew who's just sitting out there on the field and he's saying to keep going. And you're just like, well, I don't even know what's happening behind the scenes or in the live truck, but I'm just going to keep on talking about whatever the subject matter is. So that also goes into another aspect of this job, which is to really truly understand your subject and know what you're talking about. So in the case that you're doing live TV, which is always fascinating and always an adventure, to be able to keep going on and to tailor it, because sometimes on the other end of that, they may say, we're running out of time, we're going to go to you, your 1 minute hit on that player now has to be condensed into 15 seconds. You have 15 seconds, go. And you have to then all of a sudden mentally say, okay, I'm going to leave out the part about his family. I'm going to leave out the part about the baseball, and I'm going to leave the part about the football, and I'm just going to go with that. And you have to be able to have a self editor along with your self timer so that you can get the story across in a meaningful way within the confines of the time.
I think you just brought up such an awesome point for anyone listening or watching who wants to be a host. I think what Julie said is brilliant. You should practice on your own with having your friend be a producer and throwing stuff at you. Be reading a script and then have your friend tell you to speed it up or slow it down or throw it a commercial, because Julie and I can tell you all of these things are going to happen. I mean, right? Like you've been doing this a long time. I've been doing this a long time. I feel like I've seen everything, but next time I walk on set, something else is going to happen.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I would like to always come prepared to the field with is two versions of my open, because you never knew if the national anthem was going to go a little bit long, if they were going to do a ceremony or a military ceremony pregame, and you were not going to have your usual minute and a half to do your open. So I would come prepared every day with two versions, a short version and a long version. And the long version was, of course, I would do if I needed to fill for time. And the short version, which more often than not, I had to go with the short version, just the facts. So I would have bullet points of just those important things that I needed to get across. And having that prepared, that also makes you feel so much more confident coming to the field every day or coming to the stage every day, depending on, where your job takes you. But having different versions in your head ready to go makes you the easiest person to work with, which of course translates into booking more jobs.
Into more gigs. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
another thing that I tell hosts all the time. I don't care how good looking you are, and I don't care how many followers you have on Twitter. If you are a pain in the ass, guess what? They'll find someone else tomorrow.
Real quick,
Yeah.
because, and also by that same rationale, the most talented person doesn't always get the job. The most talented person may be this incredible host, but they don't always get the job. Who gets the job? The person that the crew wants to work with, especially on a long-term gig, like a full season of a sport or a traveling show. If you're doing stuff for an auto show per se, if you're perchance doing that and it travels to different states and you're going to be with someone for a long time, who do you want to be on the road with? You're on camera for maybe this amount of time, you're with them for this amount of time. So who do you want to be traveling with and sitting in the bar after the show's over with? The diva or the cool person?
Yeah.
So it is so important.
You and I met on a pilot. We shot a pilot together. And when we both lived in New York City, and I didn't know you, you didn't know me, and we show up on day one. Hey, good to see you. Let's go do this thing. And we drove with the crew to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Amish country, shot this travel show thing. It was like 146 degrees, as I recall. Like,
Yeah, it was hot.
a horrible heat front in the middle of August or whatever. But to your point, especially on a pilot, nobody knows anybody. And when we were all living together, we spent, maybe it was like 5 days, whatever it was, but it's a good thing we were both easy to work with. And I think the crew, we made lasting friends from that show. And those lasting friends lasted way longer than the show did, which is to say it didn't last at all.
Right.
So.
But you know what? I got multiple calls from that same producer for other projects that he worked on. And that's something that I always tell myself, if something doesn't work out or you don't get a gig that you really wanted or the pilot doesn't go anywhere, never discount the relationships you made, because you may not be right for that specific role or the pilot may not be right for TV or digital, but chances are you will get a call down the line for something that is right for you. And that has happened so many times in my career. I can't even tell you, where I was so bummed out that I didn't book whatever job it was. And then looking back, I'm like, gosh, I'm so happy I didn't book that job because I got something else out of it.
Or you may shoot a pilot that doesn't go to series, but 10 years later, your co-host asks you to be on his podcast.
And you gratefully accept. Yes. No, it was amazing working with you, because I was a little bit intimidated, because you, to me, were an established host and I was kind of just starting out, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I was also playing a photographer, of which I am not. I'm not a photographer. So I already felt a little bit out of place. And there you were, and you were so professional. And I learned so much from you. And it was so wonderful having somebody on set who was a seasoned host who knew how to do intros, who knew how to read copy and make copy their own, which is something that, is a skill into its own. And I think I learned so much from you. So I always tell people also, if there is somebody on the set who has more experience than you, learn everything you can from them, be their friend. And thank goodness you were so gracious about me, just kind of soaking up all of everything you were putting down. So I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate that too. That's really sweet of you to say. And I think I've always said you're only as good as your co-host. So if you're the more experienced one or the less experienced one, you two are in it together, because when you're on camera together and there's
Mhm.
no chemistry, you don't have to be best friends with your co-host. I've co-hosted shows with people I don't necessarily have a great relationship with, but when that light is on, you got to be in sync with that person, right? You've worked with enough co-hosts. How much harder is it for you when you're not feeling it, when you're not meshing with that person, and sometimes when there's jealousy between co-hosts? Why does this person have more lines, etc.?
Yeah, I agree with that. I've been very lucky, and most of my co-hosting situations have been very positive. The one, I think, quality, and I think you would agree with this, to me, that makes a great host is to be generous on camera and to give all of your energy when you're not speaking to your co-host. And you can do that without pulling focus. And you can do that in an energy sort of way, so that you're watching them, you're nodding, you're agreeing, you are backing them up in every way possible. And I may not have had bad co-hosts, but I've definitely worked with some selfish co-hosts who make it all about them even when they're not speaking. And when you are what I like to call the giving tree in those situations, when you are constantly giving of yourself, it becomes exhausting, because at the end of the day, they become vampires and they suck everything out of you. And you're just like, this is too much work. So a great simpatico relationship on camera consists of two generous hosts who are giving to each other consistently. And to me, that is truly the secret sauce to a great co-hosting relationship.
And you both will have plenty of opportunities to shine in the course of a half-hour show. There's more than enough script to go around. You said something that I think is just awesomely brilliant. I'm so glad you said it. And if our audience takes nothing from this show other than what you said, it's this: when you're co-hosting and you are the one not talking, a simple look at your co-host and a nod while they're talking is huge. I have seen so many co-hosts, the one who's not talking, just stare at camera for the minute that the other person is talking, like, just, hey, look at me smile, look at my awesome hair and my fancy clothes, totally not even at all present with what their co-host is saying. I'm watching you right now, like I'm seeing your skin
I
crawl.
cringe.
I
I
hate that.
cringe at that because I can watch, like, at this point, I watch shows with co-hosts and I can immediately tell you if they get along afterwards or not, because I can immediately see it, because I can read the body language and just know when you are on camera and knowing where your shot is and being aware of where your shot cuts off. We can feel that energy. The camera doesn't lie, it tells everything. So we can see that energy, we can feel it, we can see how you look at your partner, and you can read into all of that. So yeah, I agree. I mean, when they make it all about themselves, and I don't want to name names, but there are some people that are super selfish when they are on camera, and you're just like, please just give to your co-host. Please.
Yeah,
It's
just
this
look.
much for you.
Just look, nod, smile. That's all. Even if you don't mean it, just do it.
Just
I gotta ask you about your sports broadcasting career. I come from a sports broadcasting background. I know how hard it is to interview athletes and coaches, especially when they lose. And you've done football, you've done baseball, you've done tennis. I'm sure you've done more. You've interviewed tons of athletes. For people listening and watching who want to go into sports broadcasting, what are some tips you have for those interviews? It's easy to interview someone when they hit 3 home runs and the team wins 9-0. That's a piece of cake. What about when they make the error to lose the game, or the coach who's furious after the game's over? Those are hard.
they are very hard. Or if you're on the end of, a 5-game losing streak on a road trip, and it's the dead of summer, the days of August. Yeah, it's tough. I think at the end of the day, having a sense of empathy helps a lot. knowing that they are not just players, but they're humans as well. I think players appreciate that. And the other thing you have to realize, I mean, a lot of my experience is in baseball where you have a very long season and you have a lot of games to get to know people. So at the end of the day, these are your coworkers. And although I may not be a member of the team, I am an empathetic person in their sphere of relevance. And so they know that I have a job to do. And part of my job is asking them tough questions. It's asking the pitcher why he gave up 5 runs in 4 innings. And so because of that, I think having that sense of empathy, but also understanding that we all have a job to do. Athletes answering for their performance on the field, whether it be positive or negative, is part of their job. And they understand that. And I think being as respectful as possible is how they in turn respect you. And at the end of the day, they understand that it's part of the contract. It comes with the contract, and it's all part of the game, literally. But again, having that sense of empathy. I mean, I think treating them, we're all human at the end of the day. I don't care, what your sabermetric numbers say about you. They're still a person. And they may be going through something else off the field that you know about, battling injury, dealing with family issues at home. And so taking all of that into consideration is really important.
That's such a good point. And I think that the really good hosts can convey that empathy, not just with the words they say, but to sort of circle back to what we were just saying about being a good co-host, a look, a smile as you're asking the question, as they're answering the question, right? Just like it's that extra little bit of just being present because, yeah, they make $20 million a year. Fantastic. But to your point, who knows what they're going through in their personal lives? So as a follow-up to that, though, even with all of that said, best practices, empathetic, sometimes I would imagine you're still going to get a mean-spirited response. I would imagine it's not always going to be, Julie, you're right. I made 9 errors in that game, but the way you asked that question makes me happy to answer it. It's
right.
Still going to be bad.
Yeah,
sometimes.
no, you're right. I mean, and yes, you do sometimes get a sour response. One of the little tricks that I like to do, before the camera comes up and before the cameraman hoists it up and he's ready to count you down, is to have a little conversation with the person, before the mic is hot, before, as you're being counted down and maybe you have 10 seconds. How you doing? All right. Well, we'll get through this pretty quick.
Love it.
All right. I'm here with so-and-so. We're going to talk about his performance today. So having that, even just those 10 seconds to kind of warm them up to be like, listen, dude, I get you. I'm sorry you had a bad game. I'm here with you in my heart, but we got a job to do. So I have to ask you, and I think that right there can kind of soften the blow. But yeah, they're going to have sometimes some terse responses. It's okay. Tomorrow's another day, and hopefully they have quarterback mentality and they're able to brush it off. I mean, I think they do, honestly, but once they leave, the clubhouse or the locker room, they're able to, move on.
And by the way, it's not all gloom and doom. You've experienced plenty of those Gatorade showers you've been part of. I've seen it. I've seen you've been interviewing people and they get dunked with the Gatorade and it hits you or pies in the face. I've watched your reel and your highlight clips. That's fun. That's super fun.
It's great. It's amazing. I mean, that moment, it's so funny. All of the work that I've done, yet you Google my name and all that comes up are like Gatorade videos. But that was one of the defining moments, I think, of my career, was getting doused with Gatorade on my first day on the job. That's what people don't know. That was my first day working for the Washington Nationals, and I got dunked after Gio Gonzalez's performance. And it was amazing because I had so many nerves going into this job. It was the first time I had ever done sideline or in-game field reporting for baseball, for a baseball team in that environment. And that happened. And it was like all of the anxiety was just washed away with that Gatorade. It was very symbolic. It was very symbolic for me. It's cathartic.
Yeah. And you looked like you had such a blast doing those gigs. It's fun. I love performing in front of an audience. When I was doing Nickelodeon with the live audience, you're in front of a packed crowd. It's just, these are the reasons why we gravitate towards this business, right? Those moments that, no disrespect to anybody sitting in a cubicle. I've sat in a cubicle. It's night and day. It's totally different.
Yeah, it's amazing, and feeding off the energy of the audience. They give you so much. And I always like to incorporate the audience as much as possible. When I was doing esports gigs, before esports was like esports, we used to have a live studio audience, and incorporating them into the show is always so much fun. And having that crowd, I will say now in the age of COVID-19 and having everything, reduced to Zoom and TV screens, we do miss that. So that's why it's even more important to be able to generate that energy within yourself so that you are ready to bring it, even if you don't have the crowd. But I miss it. I do miss it.
Yeah, but you are still doing it. You are currently doing it. You're covering baseball. You've covered more baseball now than anyone but Bob Costas, perhaps.
I've had about a decade in baseball. It's been a journey.
Yeah. So what? Tell everybody what you're working on now.
So I'm still in baseball. I'm working for a company called La Vida Baseball, which is on every social media platform. We air on YouTube and on our site, lavidabaseball.com, and also on Twitter. You can follow us at La Vida Baseball on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram, and also on Clubhouse. We just got on Clubhouse, which is we do a simulcast on Clubhouse every Monday and Wednesday. And I host it myself with Jennifer Mercedes, who's a baseball journalist, and also Ozzie Guillen Jr., who's our co-host. And we talk about MLB basically from a Latino point of view. We talk about, through the Latino lens. A lot of these guys don't get a chance to have their stories told within their own voice, and we tell those stories. When you hear that a player has come over from Cuba, do you really understand what that means? Because their journey is a lot different from the guy that was drafted out of Fullerton and then was able to get into, double A. So it's a whole nother journey. It's a whole nother way of looking at things. And we also have a really cool project coming up called the Year of 21, which is honoring Roberto Clemente, 21 being his number, of course. And then this is 2021. So perfect timing. It's the 50th anniversary as well. So just wonderful to have all of that come together. It's going to be a series of short films that are going to air all about Clemente's impact on the stars and our community today.
I'm too young to have seen him play. You're too young to have seen him play. But if you talk to any older baseball fan, they just rave about that guy as the ball player. One of the
or
best
any Puerto
ever.
Rican. My mom's from Puerto Rico, and you don't even have to be a baseball fan, although most Puerto Ricans are baseball fans. But it's incredible the impact that man had. In Puerto Rico and also in Pittsburgh. I mean, you go to Pittsburgh, you go to PNC, one of the most beautiful parks. Team is struggling at the moment, but just the impact that one man had from a humanitarian perspective, from personal perspective, and also the fact that he truly had to deal with the double whammy of racism. He came up in the 60s and 70s and late 50s really, and he was still dealing with all of the racism that was happening in the mid-century. Yet he spoke Spanish. And so a lot of times his words were misconstrued in the media. It was very difficult for him, but it didn't change his performance on the field and off the field. So telling his story is truly important to us.
And what's super cool about this is you've evolved as a baseball broadcaster. You were on the field asking players questions after the games, which is awesome and super fun. But now it sounds like you've become more of a robust storyteller, which as a host, as a journalist, whatever we want to call ourselves, we want to be storytellers, right? That's where like the real meat is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, one of the things that is never lost on me is I watch a broadcast now from home, whether it be football or baseball. And, you see the sideline reporter come on for a 60-second hit, or maybe it's just her voice or his voice giving an injury report. But what people don't understand is how much work goes into just that little tiny bit of airtime. I mean, you arrive at the stadium at 1 o'clock, and then you're watching the guys take BP, and you're conducting interviews in the dugout, and then you've got pregame clubhouse hours, and then you have lunch with your friends, and then the game starts and you're there the whole time, and then you've got post-game interviews. It is a full-time job. You're traveling with the team, and maybe you got into the broadcast 3 times. So, I mean, it is a labor of love, but you're right. Having the luxury of time now and having the creative ownership of what I'm putting out there is really lovely, because a lot of times, depending on how creative and collaborative your producers are, your stories are only given as much weight as they are willing to let you have. And you're really only given as long of a leash, depending on what the team is willing to give you. So a lot of times you have a lot of constraints, time constraints, team constraints, scheduling constraints when you're doing in-game stuff. But working for La Vida Baseball, it's wonderful. We are storytellers, and we are able to talk about the issues that matter. We're able to talk about social issues. We're able to talk about how baseball and how these players are impacted on a community level. So yeah, it's a whole nother thing, and it's quite a luxury.
Oh man, that sounds great. Continued best of luck with it, and congrats with it, because it just, man, it got my blood flowing as a baseball fan. Sounds super cool. We're approaching the end of this conversation, but I can't let the conversation end without mentioning that you are an MTV VJ. I mean, how many people get to say that about themselves? I'll say it for you. I went to the studio, I watched the show. I was like, my friend Julie is an MTV VJ. That's pretty cool. That was a fun time. Yes.
It was an amazing time, although it was also, it definitely came with a lot of detractors, but it was the toughest job. It was the most wonderful, exhilarating job. The casting process alone took 9 months. Took 9 months to cast this show because they wanted the perfect chemistry between the two co-hosts. I was called in probably 3 separate times for all-day chemistry tests where they would put us all in a room and we were all together, so you knew who your competition was. It was kind of a mental, thing.
It's like the Hunger Games of hosting.
It was the Hunger Games. Oh my God, you are absolutely, yes. It was the Hunger Games of casting and of hosting jobs, because every host in New York knew that this job was happening. Every host in LA knew this job was happening. They were flying people from all over the country. The host that I ended up working with was flown in from Chicago. He ended up having to move there from Chicago because they were looking at everyone for this job. So I was up against writers, beauty bloggers. I was up against everybody. And I think it was just the chemistry test that hit it home. Myself and Kevin Mano, who's my co-host on the show, we just got along and hit it off immediately. We had an amazing time, interviewed everyone from Justin Timberlake to Bruno Mars, Britney Spears. I mean, all of your sort of 2010s, 2011 superstars, Rihanna, Bruno Mars. I mean, all those guys. It was an exhilarating time. It was the hardest time when the show ended and I found myself without a job. It was devastating. And I took it so hard because I felt that I had been to the top. So often our careers go like this. I felt I had been to the top. And when the show ended, I felt that I got kicked off the mountain, and having to recoup, it took a year to pick myself back up from that, because it was the hardest loss. I was so sad when the show ended. But it was wonderful for what it was. And I look back very fondly.
And by the way, it might have taken you a year, but you transcended all of that other stuff and rose to more national prominence, covering sports, an area which you hadn't covered before. You reinvented, you pivoted, whatever verb you want to choose, but major hats off to you for that. I was there by your side figuratively while that was happening. And it's so cool to see where you're at now. This has been really fun, super fun. Can't believe it's been almost 8 years now since we've seen each other face to face, but I can't thank you enough for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And I am so proud of you and everything that you are doing. And I love this series. And I love that you are cultivating this amazing library of working broadcasters to impart their knowledge, because everybody's experience is so different. So thank you for doing this.
Of course. And now that people want to know more about you, how do they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Julie Alexandria. You can also find me on Instagram with lots of pictures of my life and my son and working life, studio life, at Julie Alexandria 00.
Okay. I miss you. It's good to do this, but next time, hopefully in person.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You got it. Thanks. It was so great to talk with Julie. I'm so excited for her success, and she has so many incredible stories to share and wonderful advice to give. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thanks again for tuning in to Speechcast. Remember to subscribe, and if you do so on Apple, please leave us a rating and a review, and I will talk to you next week with another brand new episode. See you then.